So, hello everyone. Welcome again to our Bible study. Again, I've got Nathan, I've got Dave with me, and we're going to have a discussion. We're still in Ephesians chapter 1. In fact, this is program 7, and we're going to try and do at least the first 14 verses of Ephesians chapter 1 over the next few weeks. So, I'm glad you're connecting, glad you're enjoying. Let me read for us verses 5 and also verse 6, because that's what we're going to talk about, those two verses in this program. And so Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 5, it says, "In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, with accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves." What an incredible phrase. To the praise of his glorious grace. Dave, kick us off just with some thoughts on that phrase.
Brilliant. I mean, the whole concept again is connected to our adoption as sons in the family of God. And Paul uses this little phrase a number of times in this passage, the praise of his glorious grace. And obviously speaks of God's self-revelation of who he is. A clear focus again on God's grace into our lives.
Yeah, definitely. And the praise thing as well is all around, this lifting, to lift up. So we're elevating God and his grace in our lives. We're lifting him up and bringing focus on him again, who has adopted us. And so, like Paul's obviously linking back and saying this is our kind of proper response to him adopting us, is to praise him and to do that.
I like what you're saying about the idea of glory, doxa, or a variation of that, being the revelation of God, who he is. And I'm going to find Exodus 34:6. You might chat, because there's several times in the Old Testament where God says, "This is who I am." In fact, obviously, there's the famous verse of "I am" when he says to Moses. But Exodus 34 and verse 6 is the most quoted verse by the Bible. In the Bible, by the Bible.
In the Bible,
by the Bible. That's a tongue tester. And so again, this is a revelation of his glory. So I'm going to turn there. Please carry on chatting, and I'll let you know when I've got it.
No, I think it's. I think actually, as you find it, it's good to hear that. If the Bible's going to quote it the most, we should hear it.
This is where Moses asked God, "Show me your glory." And then it says this, "And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, which is Yahweh, Yahweh." And this is God's self-revelation, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. It goes on in the next verse, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. And so we have this idea of who God is in those few verses. There's a few more, and I encourage other people to read. But this revelation of God being a good God, a forgiving God, a gracious God, even right back there in the Old Testament. And like you say, if the Bible quotes that verse more than any other, we need to take notice.
And of course, it's seen in God's action towards us, isn't it? It's not just like somebody saying, "Well, this is who I am," but of course, God's demonstrated his compassion, his grace towards us. Again, coming back to Paul, who wrote this letter to the church. I mean, he firsthand experienced that, didn't he? Because he was someone who, first of all, was persecuting Christians. So he had all that baggage in his background, but suddenly then to have that grace in his life, so he experienced it firsthand. And I think that's the genius of it, isn't it? Really, it's not just somebody saying, "Well, this is who I am," but it's demonstrated in action. And I think that's always the genius of all our lives, not just that we say, "Hey, well, I'm Dave and I'm really kind." Well, show me how you're kind.
Totally.
Or I'm Dave and I'm generous. Well, when was the last time you helped somebody?
When was the last time you bought us a pint at the bar?
Exactly. Well, you got a free coffee this morning.
Come on.
Thank you. No, I this is coming up. I mean, over and over again, and sometimes we can feel, in the Bible study, well, are we saying the same thing, but we're just saying it in a different way? But it's so important. I think Paul wants us to get the revelation of who God is.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for our image of God to get warped.
Yeah.
And so many people have a wrong image of who God is. I was reading actually a magazine this week about Wales, and I guess it was Wales in the 40s, 50s, maybe even 60s. And
as in the country?
As in the
Just
country.
checking.
Yeah. Not Wales the animal. No, Wales.
Just checking this morning.
And how on Sundays playgrounds would be closed and locked, so you couldn't play on a Sunday. And it was a throwback to the Welsh revival in the beginning of the 1900s. And I was thinking how quickly revival becomes religion. And that's why it's so important to have our understanding fixed on who God really is. Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love. And as you say, he responds to us. He shows that by his action towards us.
And that then leads us to praise, doesn't it? It leads us to lifting God up. It leads us to worship. We're the ones who give God worship. We talked about that in a previous one. But we're giving God worship for what he has done, but we're also worshipping who he is. And who he is in our lives. And just as Dave was saying, like, he's not just saying that, he's done that for us. And we see that through grace as well. That he's done that.
Another thought when we thought about this word glory as well is it means weight. And the reason it means weight is that some things matter more than others, don't they?
Weighty thing, isn't it?
It's a weighty thing. It's an important thing. And I don't think it means weighty in the sense of onerous. But it's weighty in take notice of this. Take notice of who God is, what he's like. This is really important. This will.
It's the importance.
This will really drive everything.
And as you say, I think Paul does repeat these ideas again and again. And I do think it is because we do forget so easily. Like, not just us right here today, but, look at the different passages in the Bible right throughout. People will have done something amazing in their lives, and then next minute it's God that doesn't even exist.
Exactly,
you know what I mean? And it's no wonder that Paul keeps repeating. It's like Jesus said to his disciples, have you still got no faith? And they were with him for 3 years. We're getting off topic a little bit, but it's that idea, like they were with him for 3 years. He says to them, if you still no faith, and it was repeated and repeated. And you think by the end of 3 years being with Jesus, they would have nailed the thing. They still ask that right at the end, doesn't they?
It's why in the Bible it says stand firm in the faith. Because the circumstances can blow us all over. But also there's power in repetition. Advertisers today would say that someone needs to see our advert 10 times for them to actually recognize it. It's why, like, you'll hear certain songs on advertisements and you'll remember them, but it's because you've heard them so many times. And it is that repetition of, this is who God is. And Paul's trying to drive this so you can stand firm. No matter what's happening, you can stand firm because this is who God is.
That's why this matters. It's weighty, and so we need to keep saying it. Because even in my own life, sometimes, things have gone wrong in my own life. And I've thought, why, God, are you punishing me? And yet I know that God is slow to anger, abounding in love. He's a compassionate and gracious God. And yet I quickly can flip that into a God that might be against me. And that's why I love the worship songs that declare things like, you are for me and you're not against me, etc. So, talked about glory. Let's talk a little bit about grace. And this phrase can be translated to the praise of his glorious grace, or to the praise of the glory of his grace. In other words, part of God's who he is, revelation, is this idea of grace. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but let's pick up that thought just briefly again.
Well, of course, the word grace itself can be translated as gift as well. So it's always to remember the fact that God has given us this freely, which we'll talk about in a moment. But just to know that the grace is freely given to us, and it's available to every person. So that's the genius of it, isn't it? Really, it reveals like God's compassion to us.
Yes.
Grace it's a big word and a big concept, but to know that God does something for us that we don't deserve is a genius thing, really, isn't it? Because we always want to, if someone does something for us, well, I need to do something for them.
That's right.
It's the old Christmas gift scenario, isn't it? Well, they bought me that last year, I've got to buy them something bigger next year. Where we don't really have to do that with God, do we? Because God freely gives us. It doesn't matter what we do, that grace is still available for us, which brings God's love into our lives.
That's so good.
And this is such a big thing for Paul because of his experience. We talked about Saul and the road to Damascus and that whole transformation and God's grace just freely given. As he's going to persecute Christians. And so Paul has this big idea of grace and knows this grace personally. It's not just God saying I'm grace no, I know this personally, and that's why I worship, that's why I praise him, that's why I do what I do, because this grace has been freely given. There was no transaction, it was freely given.
No, that's great phrase, no transaction. Because we can even think that well, God will be gracious to me if, like you've said, if I do this or if I do that. No, this is who God is. It's its position. I love there's a very simple phrase in one of the Psalms, and I can't remember the reference off the top of my head, but it says, you are good and you do good. And again, when we're talking about God's glory and we're talking about his grace, this is who God is. And we've received it, and we can obviously offer that to others. You talk sometimes about people often are looking for acceptance in their lives, and I think this speaks into that, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because it's around this idea that people are looking to be accepted, they're looking to be loved. And we can try so often, can't we, to try and get people to love us or get people to do things for us. We live in a generation, don't we, where people if they don't get their click or their hit on Instagram or Facebook, then their world falls apart. You know what I mean? And it is surprising because people get quite addicted to that. But actually, the fact that we are loved, that we are accepted, that we are forgiven, those are the things that should be the foundations for our lives. And to know that's freely given. Just to think of that idea. God freely gives to us.
Give it.
Which gets me thinking of this idea, maybe Nathan can pick on this a little bit, this idea of if God has freely given to us this love, this grace, how should we then show that to other people?
I mean, just jumping off the bat, you mentioned Instagram. I know people who've deleted posts because they didn't get as many likes as they wanted to. And it is this acceptance, it is this recognition, but God gives us that. God accepts us no matter what, and I think that's the same for us, that we have to accept people. I love to say in our church, you belong before you believe, and I love to say that because that's the message of Jesus. You see that all over the gospel, you see that all over Jesus's life, that people could belong in friendship. He calls people friends. You can belong in friendship with Jesus without doing anything for him. And I think sometimes we live in a world, we mentioned it's transactional. If you do this for me, I'll do this for you, and all of a sudden friendship can get built that way. But I think for us as believers of Jesus, we have to demonstrate that acceptance, that you can belong before you've done anything for us. You can belong before you believe. You can belong even though we might have different opinions, because that's a big thing in today's world. You can belong, we can be friends. I think that whole acceptance, and that's the grace of God for each and every one of us, and that's how we demonstrate that.
And of course Jesus said, he wasn't talking about this, but I think it was included in the idea, freely you have received. Freely give. And, we're doing this recording in lockdown. I hope it lasts and has relevance way beyond that. So we'll just leave it. And studying the Bible, I think, is never old. And while ever this format is attractive in some respect, I hope it'll stay. But even in this lockdown, we can withhold grace from other people, they call it social distance shaming, don't they? And I read an article about a guy who was walking with his wife, and you're allowed to do that, aren't you? He's walking with his wife in a park, and a jogger comes past running and hurls abuse at them because they're close together and they're holding hands, which, if you're locked down together, you're allowed to do. And this guy, he wrote this article. He said, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't really believe what I'd heard. Maybe he was on a phone or something. But then the guy runs obviously he ran to the end of the park and then runs back, and he hurled abuse at them again. And I've seen it, We've freely received the grace of God that we did not deserve, and that we should offer that to others. And the reason we should offer it to others is because we don't want a community that ever gets locked down. Yeah. And the grace of God means that the church doors are open to everyone. Yeah. They're open to everyone. Now, in any community, there's ways to act, there's ways to behave, and when people can't behave and act in certain ways within a community, then those doors become closed. But that is such an exception, and so on. But this message is for outliers, people who feel that it's for the rebels. In fact,
of course, that's the sort of people Jesus mixed with, isn't it? Really,
all the time.
He was never with those who had it all together. He was often with those who were the rebels, who were the outspoken, who and so Jesus really did demonstrate that concept of belong, then you believe.
Totally.
And it's a great idea to think, well, if Jesus was right here now, would people still belong even if they didn't believe in him? I think you'd say, grace is still there for you.
Totally.
And if you can't get what I'm about, hey, my grace is still out.
That door will always be open.
Still open, and that's an amazing thing. And especially as we think about churches, because so often, people can get stuck in this idea. Well, I've got to believe. I've got to get my life right. I've got to get everything sorted out. Then I'll be accepted. Well, that's just the wrong way to go, isn't it?
And I think we can do that sometimes in a physical gathering. We can have this statement: you belong before you believe. But in today's world, I like to call them keyboard warriors. I call them keyboard warriors because when I played for Matlock Town, they had a forum, and there were many keyboard warriors on there, and it was like, do I read it? I didn't play so well on Saturday. Should I read it? But we have those on social media where we don't extend that grace, and that judgment comes out because we get to hide a little bit behind that. But we would say in a physical gathering like the church, people can belong, but we don't portray that. And I think this is but Jesus portrayed that in every situation.
So we've got a couple of minutes left just to finish, and there is a phrase at the end of that, in the one he loves, which is like the mediation. It's how God brings this glorious grace to us. Somebody pick that up.
I mean, Dave's done a bit of work for us here, which I'm thankful for. Every day's a school day. But older translations would use the word beloved, which is a term that was used in the Old Testament to speak of how God loved the nation of Israel.
Yes.
And, like God's chosen nation. And I think of that, and it's like the beloved, but now that includes everybody. And that's so powerful for us to recognize that it's not just a set group of people, it includes everybody.
And again, just picking up on that, it sort of connects this idea of how God spoke to Jesus at his baptism, at the transfiguration. This is my son whom I love.
In whom I'm well pleased.
In whom I'm well pleased. I mean, even just to finish on that, to think actually that we get that into our lives. We can sit and think, well, God is well pleased with me. I may not have it all together, but that's where grace comes in.
That's right.
Grace allows God to say to us, hey, Paul, God would say, with you he's well pleased. And that's the amazing thing. We may not get it all right, but with God, God says, through this grace, God is well pleased with us.
And that is so hard for us because we think for somebody to be pleased with us, we have to do something that would cause that. But God has given us that ahead of time, hasn't he? And he then wants our actions. And I love what you've said, like in these notes, that Jesus becomes the greatest representation interpretation of Israel. And maybe a theological quote just to end. N.T. Wright says this, that Jesus is the end of Israel's story. In other words, when he says end, he means the completion. All that God was wanting to do in and through Israel, he's done in and through Jesus. Well, I think that's a great place to finish, and to encourage each and every one of us to be those people who receive freely the grace of God. And if we've received freely, let's be those that give it. Keep the doors open, let the outliers come in, and see God do amazing things. Thank you so much for watching this program, and hope you enjoy the next one. Thank you.